Hi, I'm James McGuire, editor of Datamation, and our topic today is the future of cloud computing, the future of hybrid cloud computing. To talk about that, we've got three great experts. With us is Joe Weinman, IT consultant and the author of Cloudonomics. Hello to you, Joe.
Hey there.
Cloudonomics, what is Cloudonomics about in a nutshell?
It's about the economics of the cloud.
I was kind of
That's in a
thinking that's probably
nutshell.
what it
It's
was.
all the
Yeah.
it's about cost optimization and performance engineering, and it's everything from how much latency gets reduced by increasing the number of service nodes to things like why hybrid clouds would be cost optimal under the right parameters, such as workload variability and the appropriate difference in do-it-yourself cost versus public provider cost and
Mhm.
performance differentials and things like that.
Cool. Also with us is Bernard Golden, author of Amazon Web Services for Dummies. Hello to you, Bernard.
Hey, how are you?
Good. No, you're also the CEO of Navica, which is your own consulting outfit, correct?
That's right.
Okay. So it sounds like you're keeping yourself busy, and I know you're involved with blockchain as well, correct?
Yeah, blockchain, I think, is, sort of my career over the last 15 years has been built on two sort of epiphanies. One, the first was I got exposed to open source, and I said that's going to change the way people consume software.
Right.
The second was when I got exposed to cloud computing, I said that's going to change the way people consume infrastructure. And looking at blockchain, I think it has real potential to change a lot of business operational constructs.
Huh.
It'll be the next platform for financial transactions.
Gotcha. Okay. Also with us is Dana Gardner, principal analyst at Inter Arbor Solutions and overall tech guru person. Hello to you, Dana.
Hello, James. Great to be with you again.
Dana, what sort of projects are you working on today in the world of IT?
You broke up. I didn't hear the first part of your question.
What sort of projects are keeping you busy in the tech world these days? I know you have a podcast going.
Talking to a lot of customers, doing a lot of customer interviews and trying to find out what they're actually doing rather than maybe telling them what they should do or expecting them to do certain things. So a lot of on-the-ground research right now, and it's really interesting. There's a lot going on in analysis and big data that relate to IT and cloud, not just for the way that you would put analytics in the cloud, but also how you would analyze what you do as a business and perhaps even start analyzing what options in the cloud make sense.
Mm-hmm. Great. So,
hey, James, can I make a suggestion?
Please do.
Instead of hybrid cloud, why don't we address a topic like online video collaboration tool issues? Is it the network or cloud servers that are to blame?
That is that is a fantastic topic, and maybe we can work that in. I see a lot of possibility there.
What's that? You broke up a little bit.
I think it's a
Joe is being droll.
I think he's doing what's called trolling me. I've heard about that term on the internet. They call that trolling.
It's either droll or troll for sure.
Yeah. So hybrid cloud computing, I think that the thing about hybrid cloud is I've always thought that it's going to be this dominant model going forward, but there's certainly disagreement about that because there are some of us, and I'm looking at you, Mr. Golden, who say that private cloud is going to die a long, slow death, and so without private cloud, you can't really have hybrid cloud. So I guess the core foundational question is hybrid cloud going to be the dominant model in the years ahead? Should we be talking about this topic, or are we dinosaurs to be talking about it? Bernard, is hybrid cloud going to be real, and or is this kind of a fake idea?
Well, I mean, people start talking about hybrid cloud, and then they go, well, there's a lot of infrastructure on premise, and that's not going to go away overnight, which is quite clear. I think we're likely to see ongoing on-premise infrastructure
for years,
for the foreseeable future.
Right. The
question is what will be the nature of that infrastructure, and what proportion of the overall infrastructure use of an organization will it be? I think it's unlikely it's going to be private cloud because those have been very, very challenging, very difficult for most organizations to put together. As a sort of complement to that, I think, at least my view, is that the decline in the amount of on-premise infrastructure as a proportion of the overall infrastructure use of the average enterprise is going to decline more swiftly than most people intuit.
But if we define private cloud as a virtualized computing environment with automation, I mean, that is not going to be commonplace You know,
Well, for sure it'll be all virtualized because that's a very large proportion of overall infrastructure. Although not the totality, I guess, but a very large proportion. The question is, when you sort of say that automation, what does that really mean? Because there are people who say automation is there's an email system where you can email a VMware administrator who will spin up a virtual machine for you sometime over the next couple of weeks, all the way to people who say for automation you really need to have very, very sophisticated kinds of stuff. And there's this big sort of smudgy ambiguity about it that really affects what you claim as your on-premise stuff, how cloud capable that is.
so I want to make sure I'm a slow learner. Did I get your vote? Hybrid will be dominant. Hybrid will fade away.
Well, I think that there's going to be on-premise infrastructure, no question.
Okay.
And most organizations will be managing some mix of on-premise infrastructure and use of public cloud. Where I sort of veer off from a lot of people is I don't say that, oh, well, if you've got on-premise infrastructure, that means you've got hybrid cloud, and there's this kind of there's a whole set of sort of corollaries from that.
Right. Dana, what's your take? Are you a believer that all cloud will be hybrid cloud in the future?
Well, I don't know about the words dominant and all, but I certainly think that hybrid is a very beneficial model. That what you want to do is take advantage of all your options. That's been the case throughout technology, whether you're cloud or on-prem. You're not just going to use Unix. If Windows makes sense, you're going to use Windows servers. You're not just going to use one tool set. You're going to use the right technology for the right purpose at the best cost. So I also think, though, that hybrid is not just a divide between private and public. I think it's a divide between multiple public and maybe other flavors of managed service provider services for things like data sovereignty purposes, for just backup and recovery or fault-tolerant benefits. I think we'll see some more specialization of services that give us a more wider waterfront of cloud services to choose from, and you'll want to have a hybrid capability to move among and between and use the right tool at the right time at the right price.
Yeah, speaking of the multiple public clouds, I was at a Google press conference about a year ago, and Google was trotting out all their public cloud, or a few choice public cloud customers, and over the course of the press conference, it became obvious that some of Google's public cloud customers were using, for some of their workload, other public cloud providers. So, I mean, a hybrid cloud could be actually, multiple public cloud providers could be, defined that way. Joe, what's your take? Hybrid cloud, is it the dominant model of the future?
So I think there are a few points to make just to kind of cover some of what's said. So everyone has their own definitions, but I would differentiate between hybrid cloud, multi-cloud, and intercloud. Wow. And the way I think about it is a hybrid cloud is a combination of on-premises dedicated infrastructure, and by on-premises we could include dedicated owned infrastructure in a co-location facility, coupled with on-demand pay-per-use public resources. And the whole idea is that it's coupled as opposed to I happen to have two things, right? In other words, the fact that I have a pair of swim trunks and I have a tuxedo jacket, doesn't make it a hybrid. That's just a collection of random things. So there's some presumed way of creating a uniform hybrid out of both of those components, which I've explored a variety of different architectures, one of which is a relatively monolithic one, where I'm running the same application on the same sort of virtual infrastructure, and I can migrate instances of that application to or from the cloud, and some of the data issues get taken care of. Multi-cloud can be more of a random collection, right? So if I use Salesforce for CRM and Zenefits for HR and happen to have, let's say, Google Docs, they may or may not have any relationship with each other, and so that's not a true hybrid. That's more of a multiple cloud or multi-cloud, and I think that is almost a given. And then intercloud, when I led the intercloud testbed effort, the idea there was it was really more service provider to service provider infrastructure that was sort of behind the scenes things like Signaling System 7 is for telcos. So all that said, I don't think that private on-premises infrastructure will ever go away. And I just did a piece that looks at what some of the thought leaders are doing. So if you look at, some company that's been around, let's say, for 100 years, and you say, well, they're not sure about the cloud, but those companies that are with it, like Netflix and Google and so forth, all use the cloud, you could come to the conclusion that the public cloud is the only way to go. But actually, if you look more closely at those leading companies, they're all over the map. So Netflix is always dragged out as the poster child for public cloud adoption. The fact of the matter is that they have a dedicated owned appliance, Netflix Open Connect, which sits in multiple co-location facilities. That's their own infrastructure that does all the heavy lifting for Netflix video streaming. And what they use the public cloud for is a variety of other things, such as transcoding and running the recommendation engine and so forth.
You're
Then
saying
there
that
are
Netflix is
companies
a
that.
big private cloud user, actually.
I'm sorry?
You're saying Netflix, which is the poster boy for public cloud, is actually a really large user of private cloud.
They're a relatively large user of private-owned infrastructure. Whether or not you would call it cloud or not is hard because it's a content delivery appliance.
Right.
And in their DVD business, they're a great example of legacy infrastructure that isn't growing, doesn't have a lot of variability, and it doesn't really. There's no compelling reason to migrate it to the cloud. So you've got legacy infrastructure that isn't even private cloud. You've got private cloud and you've got public cloud. Now, all that said, I love the public cloud, and it's got use cases that are great. And to keep things short and simple, those use cases include when I have a lot of variability, when I don't need custom performance engineered infrastructure, and when I've got a attractive relative cost between owned infrastructure and the cloud. Now, for a small, medium business that doesn't have the competence, doesn't have the IT resources, doesn't have, even the basic ability or, cycles of management attention to do their own infrastructure, then of course the public cloud makes sense. I can't imagine, pizzeria, say, building a data center right behind the pizza oven so that they can cut paychecks for their employees, right? So there's a great use case. On the other hand, you've got some very tech-savvy companies that either have never gone to the cloud and don't intend to, like Evernote, which according to their own calculations, it would cost 3 to 4 times as much to go public, and those that have come out of the cloud based on both relative cost and performance optimization opportunities like Dropbox. So, what it comes down to is both types of infrastructure are going to continue to exist, to Bernard's point. And then the question becomes, how does a company do things effectively? And there, it isn't clear that even private cloud infrastructure is fully ready for prime time. But remember, when people said the same thing about public cloud, they were like, well, it's good for doing some startup, test dev kinds of things, but it isn't really ready for, true enterprise initiatives. And now it is. So if you fast forward to a few years and you exploit the ability of some new technologies like containers to aid with migration, I just see a world where the same as people live in homes and they stay in hotels and they own cars but rent cars, they're going to want to have true flexibility, like Dana mentioned, to be able to select from any of multiple environments that best meet their requirements at any given time. So I think that's not just a temporary moment in history, but the ultimate end state.
What about the idea of business continuity and disaster recovery? It seems like hybrid cloud would be, custom made for that kind of thing, because in theory you could mirror part or a big chunk of your power remotely. Dana, you had talked about this. I think there were some airline outages that may have related to this. So is hybrid cloud a peace of mind for disaster recovery?
Well, I think it's an option that should be fully explored and utilized. So if you are in a business like an airline with a reservation system and other apps, that are essential to your business, if you don't find every means to keep those apps up and running, including redundancy and multiple data centers, ability to mirror and move apps rapidly and quickly, you're not really doing the job. You're not fulfilling your KPIs as a IT organization to the larger business. So these tools are out there and used all the time. People are mirroring data centers, entire data centers, they're large data sets, certainly specific apps. So why, we don't know all the details of these specific outages, but why somebody wouldn't take advantage of a cloud portfolio as best they can for specifically these types of use cases as business continuity, disaster recovery, and so forth. It doesn't make any sense to me not to do that.
Bernard, what would you say if one of your clients talked to you about hybrid cloud and business continuity or disaster recovery? Is that something you go, oh yeah, you want this two-part solution, or not necessarily?
Cloud computing, I think, is a really great model for that. To sort of echo what Dana said, it's not like disaster recovery is something that somebody only thought of when cloud computing came along. It's been established for many, many years, and and in terms of one of the big challenges for organizations has always been, it's so expensive to have a second site or the capability of having a second site. So that's a big reason why they don't do it. And then there's the operational stuff. You have to have processes in place to do failover and so forth and so on, which are not trivial. But all of those things are well known and well established. So it's not like somebody's inventing it today. Cloud computing can help you with the first of those problems. It can provide a place where you can spin up a second environment where you don't have to have so much spend. The challenge has always been sort of, I buy one and then I have to buy another one and I never use it. I'm spending a lot of money. Oh, well, we'll cut back on that. Cloud computing doesn't necessarily solve the second problem, which is I have to have my operational processes. I have to do backups. I have to know how to do the failover. I have to have but it provides the ability to do that more easily. The latest airline thing with the Delta stuff, that was right. I would hate to be that CIO and that head of infrastructure, because there is no excuse for a giant corporation like a Delta not to have a disaster recovery system in place. And
give us the
cloud could help them, but
Bernard, if for those who did not know the detail, is there a nutshell you can give on what happened with that situation?
Well, I think what I read was that basically their data center went down, and that meant nobody could do anything electronically, which is, a single point of failure.
Yeah, there was a fire allegedly in the data center that may or may not have been caused by the power company. The Delta says it was the power utility, and the power utility says we've had no problems and all our other customers are fine. So,
okay.
Nice try.
Yeah, what about UPS? That doesn't make sense to me. Even in a single data center, you wouldn't have a single point of failure at a power issue. You'd always have redundancy for power. So
multiple redundancy, hopefully. Yeah.
So, James, to go back to your question, I think that there are a few different scenarios that certainly make sense. Now, I'm not sure whether taking a snapshot and storing in the cloud would be kind of the industrial strength hybrid that we've been sort of talking about, but it is certainly a hybrid of sorts. And to Bernard's point, the idea that, if you go back to I did BCDR a long time ago, and the strategy was, you'd store your data on tape, you'd move the tape physically off-site with a truck into some sort of secure, possibly underground, protected facility, and then you'd hope that, you could recover, and you did testing every once in a while, and that was great. So then from there, that evolved to the idea of a hot site / sister site, where basically it's the idea that, I have a car, and because I need to get to work, just in case my car gets a flat tire, I'm going to have an exactly identical car that I never use sitting in the driveway right next to it. Not to mention all the network that would be required to synchronize the facilities. That's a very costly strategy, obviously. So with cloud, I think people that are really strict, pure public cloud advocates would say, look, the cloud is arguably inherently reliable between availability zones and interregional failover capabilities, and that's mostly true when there are some questions around pricing for interavailability zone data transfers and things like that. But you could argue that the cloud is relatively secure. And by the way, if you wanted true security, you would go multi-cloud, and so you have a number of providers like Apple allegedly, reportedly has been rumored to use Azure, AWS, and Google, and it's partly in the event of a single cloud going down, which has been known to happen, and all the major cloud providers have had outages of varying durations. Then I can recover and continue operations in another cloud.
What
The,
about
the last scenario where I have my own.
Dana, were you going to make
Sorry.
a point?
Yeah, quickly, just having multiple clouds is not just for performance and reliability and fault tolerance, it's also for economics. You want to have multiple sources. You want to play them off of each other. You want to negotiate on a contract with the basis to pull out of that contract if you need to. You've always wanted to have multiple sources when you're buying technology, whether it's on-prem, a service, SaaS, cloud. If I'm a CIO, I'm definitely going to have multiple public clouds as customers.
Right.
Yeah, and to that point, actually, things like the Universal Cloud Exchange are beginning to create real markets for that exact ability to be able to see different resources and be able to select from among them based on your own exact requirements and dynamic pricing.
What about this is slightly off on a tangent, but this kind of reminded of this. And Bernard, you might know more about this. I'm not sure, being the AWS person that you are, that the CIA building their private cloud and contracting with AWS for that.
Uh-huh.
Is that up and running? And is that maybe the most famous hybrid cloud in the world? And used with AWS. I've always loved that. Do you know anything about what's going on? Or is that just up and running and doing fine as far as we know?
It is, as far as I'm pretty sure it's up and running. Informed sources say.
Right. You've talked to Edward Snowden recently. He would probably know. I don't know. Someone would know.
Yeah. It's so I think it is up and running. The feedback I've heard is that it's up and running, but the people in the CIA are frustrated because it doesn't have all the latest and greatest that the rest of Amazon has.
Really?
And they're kind of like, well, I'd really like to take advantage of this other service. So there's some chafing around that. But I think it's up and running.
What do you think that latest and greatest issue is? Why wouldn't the Central Intelligence Agency have the latest and greatest?
Well, I mean, the thing about these kinds of services these huge cloud providers are offering is they're not trivial to install and configure and operate and all that. I mean, it's not like I'm going to download a zip file and and double click on it and I've got this thing up and running. A lot of complexity around it. And so for Amazon, and it would be true if it was Google or Azure, to transfer one of these new service offerings into an environment, there's a whole lot of planning, a lot of capacity, many complicated things putting into it. So I think it's probably, the CIA bought a certain amount of infrastructure, and if they said, oh, well, now we want to run Lambda in it, be like, well, now we need, another, I don't even know however much or whatever it might be. There's a lot of complexity associated with them that I think people don't really understand. It's kind of like if you use Netflix or any of these big services. You just go, oh, I click on the button and it happens. It's magic. There's a lot of stuff that a company like Netflix has to achieve to deliver that reliably. And I would assume that that's the sort of thing going on around getting access to these additional services within the CIA private cloud.
Mm-hmm. What about the idea, and Joe, I think you had talked about this, that what does hybrid cloud mean for provider strategy? I guess hybrid cloud provider strategy, and then customer choice. I mean, in theory, perhaps there's more contract bidding going on in a multi-cloud situation. How does hybrid cloud play into that?
So I think there are a few different dimensions. One thing is it depends on what your worldview is, right? So if you did have this worldview that said the public cloud is the ultimate end state, every user from an individual to the largest Fortune 100 enterprises will end up there very soon, then the correct provider strategy would be to focus all your resources on pure public, as some companies say that start with a G or an A have done. On the other hand, if your view of the ultimate end state is in fact hybrid, then you would want to be able to have a strategy that said, look, we've got the best public cloud and we've got the best private cloud, and by the way, we provide all the orchestration, migration, data synchronization, et cetera, tools that are required to make it work seamlessly and effortlessly together with, cost and performance optimization built in, and a, policy-based orchestration engine, and this, that, and the other thing. And I do have to say that to me, if you think that hybrid is the correct strategy, then among the big players, Azure would seem to be in the best position. And if you didn't think that and you thought that public was the right way to go, then Google and AWS would seem to be right. I know, and I'm not as smart as the people that work for those companies, but again, I've done all the analysis, both in terms of the raw economics of cloud infrastructure, all the elements that make things up, additional costs that are required one way or another, whether it's contract administration or dealing with your own acquisition. And it just works out that for larger companies that have relatively flat demand and the wherewithal to do it, then having your own infrastructure is a perfectly good option. And for those that don't, then public is a perfectly good option. And I just don't understand why a company wouldn't want to capture all of the revenue from both those business models. And a good example outside of the cloud context that comes to mind, which I wrote about in Cloudonomics a few years ago, is Starbucks. Starbucks was in the coffee as a service model, right? They opened coffee data centers all over the place on every street corner, and you could get your coffee as a service. Then they realized that people didn't just want the service, they wanted the actual product within that service, which is Starbucks branded roasted coffee beans. And so they started selling it as a private cloud. You can walk into any Costco or grocery store and buy Starbucks bag, and it's a do-it-yourself. You need your own operations personnel to put the grounds in your own private infrastructure, namely your coffee maker. But guess what? You get coffee just the same, and it's at a lower cost than buying it at $5 for 5 cents worth of grounds as a service.
So it's just one provider
guess
going
what?
both
As a
ways.
provider, as a provider, what they realized is, hey, we're leaving money on the table. Let's sell it both ways. We're not going to shutter our restaurants, but we can make money both for do-it-yourself customers and as a service customers. And why don't we want all the revenue?
In the interest of time, or Dana, were you going to add something to that?
Yeah, I just think that there's been a shift in the way IT is procured that is pretty important, and hybrid cloud and cloud have accelerated that, or even created the inflection point. And the difference is between IT being an internal provider to an organization, shifting to IT being just part of another supply chain management issue. So cloud, in all its permutations, SaaS, microservices, backup and recovery services, this is now part of a supply chain that every organization needs to then look at. And they need to treat that supply chain like they've been treating other parts of their supply chain the same way, looking at risk, looking at dependability, looking at cost. So whether this is going to be multi-cloud, hybrid, intercloud, increasingly it's going to become more granular, I think, down to services, containers, help that. APIs are very prominent. What you need to think about, though, as an organization is how do I manage my supply chain for getting IT services that the best price and the performance that I require. So that kind of thinking of going from IT as a unit that's fully supported internally through cost and management and operations to IT as services that I procure and that a supply chain type of benefit and thought and cost-benefit analysis needs to bear. That's what many companies are going through right now.
So, James, if I can jump in, that's a really interesting perspective, Dana. So, help me understand more about that. Who would be the procurer? You said you need to look at. So would that be some part of IT would look at another part of IT. So like an application group would look at at the on-premise stuff as versus Amazon and sort of go, I'm going to make an assessment of you. You're part of my supply chain. Or would that be a business unit looking at IT as the central organization, saying, I'm going to evaluate you and what you can deliver versus what I can get from Salesforce or whoever it would be, or help. I mean, I'm really interested in that perspective because I think that's
right now IT is being asked to be the IT procurement supply chain management function in addition to being traditional IT, providing one source of IT to the company. But as we know, it's always been multiple sources. There have been systems integrators right from the get-go. You've had multiple sources. And IT is often asked to be the integrator and or to hire integrators. So IT is sort of used to playing both sides. But I think over time, as these become more standardized and become automated, that it will become a business function. And this will elevate to the back office type of functions that a supply chain management function involves. And that, yes, they'll be specialized for IT perhaps, but I do think it's ultimately a supply chain type of a mentality rather than IT provides IT to the organization.
So if I could jump in to James, cognizant of time, just that perspective, if you think about the evolution of what's happened, we see decreasing time intervals, right? So in the old days, you had a monolithic application that you were building, and it was millions of lines of code, and you spent years on it to figure out exactly what the optimal infrastructure would be, and you had the dog and pony shows from all of the hardware vendors, and they came in, and years later you actually built and deployed, and maybe it even worked. Fast forward, and you've moved to smaller and smaller increments of capacity and smaller increments of time. And so it's pretty clear that the ultimate end state then becomes, it isn't just you're figuring out a particular cloud provider and or selecting infrastructure resources based on that, but if you have microservices and Lambda functions, why wouldn't you go to real-time bidding for a particular service? Like if you need to process payment for a credit card and you can get it at 0.0003 cents from a particular provider versus 0.0031 cents from a different one, as long as they're authorized, certified, approved, etc., then it's all good. And maybe a good way to think about that role function in line with the question that Bernard was asking is it's sort of the evolution from, and I'm not sure that this actually would be historically accurate, but from companies having their own private jet to having a corporate travel department to going with a third party that acts as a broker like Concur, that then is basically saying, look, if here's your need, right now you want to fly from Newark to Dallas, then we recommend these 3 flights. And ultimately that happens as part of a real-time bidding process, as we're already seeing in things like online ad sales.
Hey, and that's a good analogy. And you might still have your own corporate jet. You might still have charters. You might still use commercial airlines. But you're going to look at all of them from a supply chain perspective, and you're going to get the right airline service for the right use at the right price. And it's also interesting with IT because it's becoming so complex, and as it gets more granular down to the service level, the API level, it's going to become more complex. We're talking about making decisions about security, privacy, performance, KPIs, cost, data freedom, data sovereignty, privacy regulations, which might be different in the EU than they are in North America and the United States. So many variables come to play that you can only think of an algorithmic approach, maybe multiple algorithms being brought to bear on the decision about what IT service gets used. I can even very quickly foresee where machine learning, bots, and AI come to bear, and there might even be this new word we could conjure up. It's sort of bot ops. You're thinking about how do I factor ops through all of the best tools at my disposal, which could probably be artificial intelligence, machine learning, cognizant services. But keep your eye on bot ops, and maybe you heard it here first, because I think that's where we're headed.
That's great. I love that term.
I love the term bot ops for sure. Speaking of bot ops, which is wonderfully futuristic, let's take just a moment and look to the future, like 2025, 2023. What's what is cloud infrastructure going to look like in the year 2023 or thereabouts? Mr. Golden, what's your take on that?
I'll defer to my fellow panelists and hear what they have to say, and then I'll.
Oh, you'll bring it home. Okay, I like that. Joe, what do you take? Like the year 2023, or what is cloud going to look like?
Assuming the machines let us live after they take over.
Right. Our robot overlords will let us live, we hope.
I think that you'll just continue to see this heterogeneity continue to evolve, and I think also that you'll see some companies that were late to the bandwagon get on, and others that were early to the bandwagon get off, because I just don't fully understand some of the decision making that exists. And I don't want to pick on any companies, but we were talking about Delta earlier. Like, it's hard to believe that they didn't have some sort of backup failover strategy that leverages the cloud. And maybe in their defense, one of the issues as far as making that easy is, I assume that they have spent 50 years, this is all hypothesis on my part, but I assume that they've spent 50 years building this complicated infrastructure that's just very difficult to unwind, right? It wasn't built with modern precepts, development paradigms, et cetera, in mind. And so you've got the reservation system, which is a billion lines of code that ties into some operations system that's flight scheduling and crew scheduling, and it's all a mess that it's probably more of a wonder that it actually ever works, when you think about how hard it is to build a large-scale system like that, than that it went down after working for so long. So that's kind of one way to look at it, perhaps. So in any event, I think that you're going to see greater ease of use and finer granularity, and obviously the move to microservices. You've seen this evolution from mainframes to minis to personal computers to virtual machines to containers to microservices, and I think it's going to be pretty hard to get like lines of code as a service, although who knows. So microservices seems to be about the right level of minimum granularity, and I really like Dana's idea of bot ops as that you have policy-based orchestration, you have something like, we just heard that Google has been applying DeepMind artificial intelligence technology for data center operations, and you can certainly picture an increased level of automation. So there are companies like ABB with what they're doing with the evolution from data center infrastructure management to data center services optimization. You've got companies like TSO Logic and Vigilant that have various levels of automation. You see what Google has just done. And so, having all of that under the control of intelligent optimizers that are trying to solve the multi-criteria optimization problem of optimal user experience, optimal reliability, doing it all at optimal cost, and being able to handle unexpected events like data center outages and so forth, all that just makes sense. And then, the counter trend is, no company likes complexity, and rightly so. So the idea of having, a million possible vendors for a particular service doesn't really make any sense. And then you've got the famous Dave McCrory meme around data gravity, which just says it doesn't help that you can save a nickel on a hotel room if you've got to move your entire household across the country to take advantage of that. So it isn't just cost optimization, you also have data migration costs and user experience issues. So for that reason, you're probably going to see more stability. So it just seems like there's this never-ending dilemma, right, where there's just no good solution. You want to have flexibility, but you also want stability.
Dana, your take on the future of hybrid cloud computing, say the year 2023, what is it going to look like when we're talking about this in 7 or 8 years?
Right. Well, I'm sure I'll be on a beach or on a lakeside looking at that from a far distant view with not too much interest. But
sipping my Thai and Tahiti, I hope.
Yeah, exactly. But 7 years is not that long, and so
right.
The old adage that things won't happen as fast as you expect, but they'll happen more impactfully, I think will be the case here. The current way that companies do IT is not sustainable. And whether it's security that pushes them over the edge, outages like we saw at Delta and Southwest put them over the edge, the fact that their costs are too high as a portion of their capital expense for IT. For some reason or another, they're going to start looking for some alternatives, and we've seen them do that with SaaS very rapidly. We're certainly seeing them do that with public cloud. And so as you look at those alternatives to the status quo, you're going to have to refactor not just the technology, but the ops, the process, the culture. IT is not an island. IT is not a department you go to. IT is a fabric within the company. Attaining and getting IT is just like attaining and getting any other service in the business. It goes through supply chain. It goes through business metrics and processes, quality control, and so forth. And then the big suppliers of IT will have to respond to that, and they'll have to provide IT in a fashion that's highly automated and highly understood, not in terms of the technology under the hood, but in how to acquire, use, measure, and optimize. So I do think that our AI is a perfect opportunity to take computing and apply it to the problem of computing, and attaining the right services at the right fit, at the right price, would be a great use case, and the computer makers would be fools not to try to do that. You might think that Amazon or Microsoft Azure wouldn't want to do that because they'd lose their possible lock-in or dominance. So a third party will crop up and they'll say, use all those other public clouds and we'll help you manage it using our algorithms. And so there's a great market opportunity. You could drive a truck through. We expect those companies that miss the public cloud opportunity to probably be in a good place to do that.
What precisely is the market opportunity, to make sure I'm defined on that one?
To come up with the means to manage through algorithmic intelligence the right mix of various cloud services to support your apps, your data, your business process.
Like a cloud exchange, right?
Well, I don't think I'd call it a cloud exchange. I'd get more granular, but yeah, you would pick and choose among, like a marketplace. Just like people probably buy and choose commodities, whether it's copper or sugar or coffee beans, right? I mean, it's not just one supplier, and it's a big fat computer somewhere that's managing those commodity exchanges, and so we need to bring a computer to manage the computer services.
Interesting. Bernard, your take on the future, and what do you see in that distant, hazy future?
Well, in the 7 or 8 year time frame, I would say that probably 50% of all corporate workloads are going to be running in public cloud, and that's going to be an ongoing trend. And on-premise is going to be a declining proportion of the overall application portfolio or total infrastructure use. And there's going to be a lot of bumpy stuff on the and of that amount that shifts out of on-premise stuff, a very large proportion of it will go to SaaS. Some proportion of it will be rewritten. To Joe's point, I mean, the thing about this Delta thing is they've probably got this enormous hairball, and just saying, well, I want to move that out of my own data center to somebody else's because Amazon's more reliable than my stuff. That's a nightmare. But it's such a core thing to the way they run their business. If they really wanted to do that, they would have to rewrite the entire thing.
Right.
Who knows if they'll do that? But there's lots of stuff they've got that probably has been homegrown or some package they've got that they're responsible for. They'll go, let's go hive that off and put that into, let's find a SaaS provider for it. And I think that'll be the dynamic. Is this something we really have to run ourselves? Okay, that's going to stay on premise. Okay, this isn't something we really have to run ourselves. Can we migrate it to a public cloud, or is this something that we can move to SaaS? And there's going to be an ongoing dynamic within IT organizations to sort of optimize their focus. Because, as Dana said, kind of the current path is unsustainable.
Right.
It's kind of like, there's just they're going to run out of the ability to do that.
Amazing, and hopefully we will be around to see it and go, hey, we were right or wrong about that.
Dana won't. He's going to be sipping a Mai Tai in Illinois somewhere.
We're all jealous of Dana, really.
I think we should
I won't really know about it, but I expect it to happen anyway.
We should all gather for that conversation at Dana's Lanai.
I just checked my calendar and I am free that day.
Oh, yeah.
Gentlemen, thank you very much.
I'll bring the beer nuts.
The beer nuts, and I'm so right. I want to nibble on the beer nuts. I will send you guys the link. We can all tweet about it. I thank you very much. I think I've learned something. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for the invitation.
All righty. Bye-bye.
Bye now.
Cheers.